The wind blew hard across the high plain, hard enough to carry dust and rumor and regret. It hit the town of Mercy's End like a long, dry sigh and rattled the church door. Jonah Alden, who wore a preacher's collar and a face scrubbed by years of hard choices, was setting out the small tin cups for the evening tea. When the door banged open and a woman in a soaked white dress stumbled inside, it was not rain that had soaked her. It was sweat and fear in a fast ride. The hem was torn, her hair half up, like a promise broken halfway through. The town's bell had not rung, but her arrival sounded like an alarm. Her eyes met Jonah's. For a heartbeat, something old stirred in him, and then he swallowed it back like a man swallowing fire. "Any rules?" she asked, breath tearing at her chest. "About who can stay here? About sanctuary?" Her voice had a tremble under the grit. Jonah saw the raw red mark at her wrist, where a ribbon had been tied too tight. He saw the curve of a small silver locket at her throat. He saw the dress-white fine. "Wrong for dust roads and a horse's back." "There are rules," Jonah said, but his voice stayed gentle. "But mercy is older than rules." She wavered, her fingers at the buttons of that dress. The cloth clung to her like a fever. She started to loosen the top of it, fumbling. The blood rushed to Jonah's face. "Miss, stop. You'll catch your death like that." There's a blanket. He reached for the folded wool on the pew, but it was too late. Her hand slipped and her knees buckled. The woman crumpled against the nearest pew with a soft sound like a prayer falling apart. Jonah caught her before she hit the floor. He wrapped the blanket around her shoulders with quick, respectful hands and turned his face away like a man guarding something precious. Her head fell against his shoulder for a breath, then drifted to the crook of the pew as he eased her down. "Hold on," he said. He said it to her, said it to himself. Outside, the wind scraped a new edge in the dust. Inside, the church held its breath. Her name was Eliza. He learned it when she woke. Hours later, from a shallow sleep that tossed her back and forth like a small boat. "Where am I?" she whispered. "In the Lord's house," Jonah said, and then wished, suddenly, painfully, that he had chosen any other words. She flinched and looked around. A stove flickered in the corner. The smell of coiled coffee and old hymnals wrapped the room. He had draped the blanket across her shoulders. He had set her wet dress, no longer soaked, but still wrinkled from panic, over the back of a chair. She wore a thin shift, modest and plain, one sleeve torn. His coat lay over it like a shield. She sat up, fingers going straight to her neck as if to check the locket was still there. When she felt the little oval, she breathed again. "Thank you," she said. "Reverend Jonah Alden," he said, sitting back a little, careful to keep a respectful distance. "Welcome to Mercy's End." Something flicked across her face at the name. She looked at him longer this time, like someone trying to make out a shape through smoke. Eliza Carter. She said. A tiny spark shot through his chest at the sound of her voice forming those two ordinary words. He kept his face steady because he had learned to keep his face steady, even when the ground moved under his boots. "We have tea," he offered. "It's not good, but it's warm." She gave a small, tired smile that almost knocked him over because he knew that smile. He had known it through different time and different names. She sipped the bitter tea and drew the blanket closer. Her glance flicked to the window, where a thin line of dawn was trying to wrestle down the night. "I ran," she said, almost to herself. "If they see the horse, they'll know." "I left the horse down by the reed bed, Jonah asked. "Eliza?" a voice called from outside. She flinched again. Jonah stood, went to the door, and opened it a crack. Two figures passed by in the street, their hats low, their saddles heavy. Jonah recognized the cut of their coats. Not the law. Hired men. He closed the door softly. "I am supposed to be at my wedding," she said. She tried to say it like a joke. It came out like a stone catching in a river. Jonah's hands went cold and warm at once. "To whom? Silas Reddick," she said. Of the Reddick spread out by 3 pines. Jonah did not have to pretend to know the name. Everyone in Mercy's End knew it. Reddick had money and men and a voice that could turn a mayor to a clerk. He had a way of putting a hand on a shoulder that looked like comfort from the front and like a shackle from the back. "Eliza," Jonah said slowly, "do you need me to send for the deputy?" She shook her head. "Ezra Pike. He's a good boy. But Silas owns the judge. He owns most of the men who ride for the judge, too." She looked down at her hands. "My father owed Silas for winter feed and a broken fence line," Silas said. "He said there was one way to settle it. He said he loved me, and a man should marry where his heart led." She tried to swallow. "He said he could be patient, and then," Jonah asked. "He set the date." A long silence sat down between them. Jonah could hear his own breath, could hear the fabric of the blanket shift when she moved. "Do you want to marry him?" he asked. She looked up and didn't blink. "No," she said. Jonah felt the scrape of a different history against his ribs. Like a note he had written and never mailed, like a promise he had made and broken with silence. He felt his own name, the old one, the one that no one here knew, pushing up from beneath his collar like a weed through the cracks. "Eliza," he said, and her name shook loose something he had kept tied down. "You are safe here for now? People respect the church. They'll try to push past that, but not right away." "Do you believe that?" she asked. He did not answer. Not with words. She tightened the blanket and looked at him hard. With that look, he remembered like she could see both the man and the soul inside him. "You think you know me?" she said, a little wonder in her voice, a little warning. The question hung there, small as a thorn and just as sharp. Jonah's mouth opened. He closed it again. The church door rattled. Voices called. Boots thumped. Time, which had stretched thin for a moment, snapped back. "Reverend." Deputy Ezra Pike's voice came through the wood. "We heard something. You in there?" Liza's eyes darted to Jonah's. He stood, spine straight. "I am," he called. "Give us a minute." He looked back at Eliza. She looked like a girl he had known, and like a woman who had ridden through the night because she loved. Her life enough to keep it. He made a choice. He had made 1,000 choices since he crawled out of a ditch years ago and decided to live, and each one had led him here. He made this one as steady as he could. "Do you want sanctuary?" he asked. She lifted her chin. "Yes," she said. Jonah lifted the bar on the door. Etha news of a runaway bride moved through Mercy's End like a prairie fire. People who had not bowed to a pew in months found their way into the church on the thin excuse of lighting a candle. Mrs. Mara Pike, who ran the boarding house, with strong arms and a kinder heart than she let on, brought 2 tins of biscuits that somehow stretched to feed all the curious. Deputy Ezra Pike stood on the steps, awkward and upright in his too big badge. He had not been long a deputy. Before that, he had been a boy who loved horses and never shot at anything that could shoot back. "Reverend," she said low, after they had shooed the gossips away and shut the church door again. "Silas sent men. Said he'll come himself by noon." Jonah nodded. His jaw ached from the way he clenched it. "Miss Carter," Ezra said, tipping his hat. He tried not to let his eyes flick to the corner where the white ruined dress lay folded. He failed briefly, then did not look again. "I can make a show of defending you, but you know the judge," Ezra said, his mouth twisting. "If Silas presents a promise of marriage written by consent and says you ran in a moment of nerves, the judge will hand you back like you were a strayed cow." "Only if we let the law stop at the letter and not the heart," Mara Pike said, setting down another plate with a thump. She looked at Eliza, then at Jonah. "There's an old root cellar under my boarding house," she said. "It's snug, dry, and full of jars. You'd be hidden from anyone who doesn't know to knock twice, wait, and knock once more. You can get there by the alley." Lisa set down her teacup. "I've been hiding since autumn," she said. "I don't want to hide anymore. Sometimes hiding is how you live long enough to stop hiding," Mara said. She looked at Jonah with an expression that knew more than she let on. "If a woman asks for sanctuary, you give it until you cannot. Those are rules old as dust." Liza looked at Jonah, the blanket slipping down her shoulder. He saw how tired. She was painted into her face, the hurt too, and the hope under it like a lamp turned low. "We need time," he said. "Ezra's right. Silas will come with words on paper and men with guns. We are safe in the church until he pushes, but he will push." Take Mara's offer until I figure the next step. Eliza stared at the floor. When she looked up again, there was fire in her eyes. Not fierce fire, a different kind. "Do you know me, Reverend?" she asked, so soft he almost did not hear. Every part of him wanted to say yes, and say her name from the past like a blessing. But the air was thick with people and law and the rum. Or of horses. Truth, like love, would have to wait a breath longer. "I knew a girl once who would not be owned," he said. "She had a laugh like a creek in summer and a stubborn streak the length of the trail. You remind me of her," Eliza smiled again, faint and fierce. "Then we'll go," she said to Mara. She stood, and he caught the faintest sweet scent that tugged at a memory of wheat fields and wildflowers. He stepped aside and opened the side door to the alley as she passed. Her fingers brushed his hand. It was nothing. It burned him anyway. He watched her go with Mara into the narrow seam of shade. And then he turned back to the pews and the pulpit and the book of golden words he read from every Sunday. Words about mercy and grace that he needed. As much as anyone he preached to, he found he was shaking. He put both hands on the back of a pew until the shaking stopped. When he looked up, the door to the town swung on its hinges. Men were gathering. Mercy's End had the look of a place. Testing its own soul, IVN the afternoon, a rider came like bad weather. Boonfitch took the main street as if it had been drawn for him alone. He was slick not in the oil sense, but in the snake sense clean shirt, clean boots, a smile that had seen every lie in the world and liked them fine. He tethered his horse and took his time, eyes sweeping over the town like he was choosing what he might want to own next. Jonah's stomach turned. He had not seen Boonfitch in years. He had hoped never to again. "Evening, Reverend Fitch said, stepping into the church without removing his hat. His voice held the smoothness, folks. Called charm, and Jonah called a warning. "It's afternoon," Jonah said evenly. "So it is." Fitch's eyes slid over the pews, the hymnals, the simple cross. "Smells like regret in here. And biscuits. We give away both free," Jonah said. Fitch chuckled. "You were always quick." Jonah did not correct the tense. He did not say, "I am not the man you once knew." He suspected Fitch knew far too well who he was. "What do you want?" Jonah asked. "Oh, nothing really. Just to look around at a humble house of worship." Fitch's gaze snagged for half a heartbeat on something Jonah could not see. "Also," he added, "Silas Reddick is coming. Asked me to do the asking before he did the taking." "Businessman's courtesy. Mercy's End isn't business," Jonah said. "Everything is business," Fitch said, almost kindly. He took a step closer, and Jonah caught the smell of tobacco and a hint of a cologne meant to pretend hard. Years never happened. Fitch leaned in as if to examine the grain in. The wood of the pulpit, under that voice like butter, was steel. Where is she? Jonah's heart punched against his ribs. He set his palm down on the pulpit as if to hold himself upright by holding something bigger than he was. "You know, I can't tell you that," he said. "In the same way, I know you will tell me if I push the right way," Fitch said. "Guess. I know what you are when you take off the collar. You're a man who doesn't stop caring even when he's tired of caring. It makes you soft." He smiled. "That softness is the handhold I use." Jonah looked away to the simple glass windows, to the dust motes floating like lost stars. He thought of Eliza's eyes. He thought of the smell of wildflowers. "You still wearing it?" Fitch asked softly, like a friend who might have remembered something good. "That thing around your neck that ain't the collar?" Jonah's hand went up without permission to the chain under his shirt. The cross he wore was plain and old, a bit of silver rubbed smooth. He had not taken it off since the day he had decided not to put a bullet in his own head beside a dried creek bed. He had not meant anyone to see it. "Thought so," Fitch said. He eased back. The smile slipped, and something else stepped forward in his eyes, a memory of the man he might have been. It stayed only a moment. "We were boys, weren't we?" he said, almost musing. "Out under the sky, thinking we were made of iron and luck." "We were foolish," Jonah said. "We were both," Fitch said. "Tomorrow at noon, Reddick will make his formal ask. You'll have the judge with him. You'll have men with guns. You'll use law to point the guns straighter. Bring the girl. Out, Jonah. And he leaves this town with his pride intact.
What?
And if I don't, Fitch's smile came back colder. Then I remind him who you really are. Not Jonah Alden, kindly preacher. I remind him of another name. One with dust and smoke on it. One that starts with N. Jonah did not react. A man can learn to keep his face like a river and freeze. Inside, the ice cracked loud. Fitch reached out and drew a slow, careful cross into the dust on the pulpit. He looked at it a moment. Seems wrong to leave a thread on holy wood, he said, and brushed it away with a swift pass. He tipped his hat. See you at noon, Reverend. When he was gone, the church felt colder, and Jonah could feel the old world he had run from like footsteps catching up. He set his hands on the pulpit again and lowered his head. Lord, he said, quiet as an apology, I will tell the truth. Help me not to lose everything when I do. The night slid over Mercy's End, and the town held its breath. Mara's root cellar smelled like apples and damp earth. Elisa sat with her back against the cool stone and traced the little oval locket. With her thumb, it had a hairline cracked down one side from the time she had dropped it on the creek bank years ago. Once a boy had given it to her. He had laughed when she pretended not to cry at the sweetness of it. He had said, if it breaks, it means it has lived with you. She had thought he had died in the war and tried to let him stay dead in her heart. But hearts in towns hold on to what they need to hold on to. Mara came down the narrow ladder with a mason jar of soup and a small smile. She was not a woman who made a lot of words about feelings, thank God. She set the jar down and sat. I was a runaway bride once, Mara said, surprising Eliza. Ran at the end of the aisle when I figured out the man I thought. I loved the taste of whiskey more than anything living. Folks called me coward. My mama called me back. I didn't go. Stayed at the Pike place and married work. Not so bad. No hangovers. Eliza wrapped her hands around the warm jar. He told me he loved me, she said, and heard in her own voice. How young she sounded under all the dust. Men who love you, don't scare your father into saying yes, Mara said, not unkind. Men who love you don't buy judges. Men who love you ride through the bad weather to reach your door. That kind.
Eliza.
Look down. Once, she said, almost to herself, a boy rode through rain and mud to reach me. We were 17. He kissed me under the cottonwood and promised to come back from the war and make a home where we could hear the frogs at night. He wrote me letters that smelled like smoke and pine. Then the letters stopped. Mara was quiet. She did not ask a question. It invited the answer anyway. They told me he died, Eliza said. A neighbor brought a bullet-pocked canteen with his initials scratched on it. Later I learned folks sometimes take what they can from bodies at the edge of a field and sell it to grieving girls. I hate myself for the hope that stayed with me anyway. He had a small scar on his chin from the time he fought my brother over. A peach. I kept seeing it in crowds. You still see it? Mara asked. Eliza's mouth trembled. I think the Reverend has a scar like that, she whispered, as if the stones might tell on her. And something in the way he said my name, she stopped, breath hitching. It is foolish. Maybe, Mara said. But the only way through foolish is through. Eliza set down the jar. The root cellar's cool pressed at her arms. She felt the heat rise in her face, not from fear this time. From the sudden, unbearable hope that truth might be coming from both directions. I'll go to him, she said, getting to her feet. Careful, Mara said. The street is thick. With eyes, I know a way, Eliza said. She did. There was a back alley that ran behind the schoolhouse, and a narrow fence gap that wasn't in men's maps. She climbed the ladder and pushed up the trap door. The boarding house creaked like a body turning over in sleep. She slipped through the kitchen, out into the night. She moved through shadow, soft, quick, sure. She kept to the edges. The moon was a thin hook, held just enough light to hang decisions on. When she reached the church, she paused. Through the side window, she could see Jonah, head bowed, a letter resting on the pulpit. He had a pen in, his hand in ink on his fingers. He was writing like a man who had run out of ways to keep silent. She put her palm on the glass. He looked up as if he had felt the pull of it and turned. Even through the distortion of old glass, she saw the jolt run through him at the sight of her. He came to the side door and opened it. "Eliza," he said. She stepped inside. The church smelled like ink and wood and the ghost of the morning's tea. "I know you," she said. He closed his eyes for a breath. When he opened them again, he did not hide. "I am Nathaniel James," he said. The name fell into the room like a stone into a well, and ripples went out, touching everything. "I was that boy." She put her hand to her mouth and dropped it. Again, and took a step toward him, and then stopped. A small laugh and a gasp tangled in her throat. She reached out and touched his face like she had done once under a cottonwood, her fingers finding the small scar on his chin. He closed his eyes again and leaned into it, just a fraction. "How?" she asked, tears coming quiet and clean. "They said you." "I died in a way," he said. "The part of me that came back wasn't the same man who rode away. The war, I did things. After, I fell in with men who did more. Boone Fitch was one of them. I carried a rifle for a cause that lost in a gang, that didn't believe in anything but itself. And then one day I didn't want to do any more harm. I walked away. I ended up with a man who preached under the open sky. He wasn't ordained by anyone but hunger and hope. He took my arm one day, when I'd been crying, and told me God didn't break me to throw me away. He said to find a small town and do the kind of good that looks like sweeping floors and telling boys to put out their cigarettes. I've been doing that till you walked in and every old fire started. I should have told you this morning. I was a coward." She listened without flinching. She had learned how. When he finished, she touched the locket. "You are a preacher now," she said. "Maybe not by papers, but by trying." "I don't know if I can keep the pulpit after I tell what I've done," he said, "but I can be a man who tells the truth. That's worth something." "You didn't write me," she said. The words held pain that made both of them look down. "No," he said. "I wrote and burned every letter I wrote, not because I didn't love you, because I did. Because I had done things that would stain your name if you knew. I thought if I stayed gone, you might learn to hate me and be free. I was wrong, in me," she asked. "You left me two men like Silas." Jonah's mouth pulled tight. "I know," he said. "If there is a weight I will carry to the end of my days, it's that I am sorry." They stood in the small silence that follows an apology you mean and cannot fix. "I loved you," she said. Her voice cracked. "I think I still do." Let out a breath that hitched like a held-back sob and then smoothed. He took her hand. He did it like a man half afraid she would pull it back. She didn't. "I am not supposed to love like that," he said softly, glancing at the cross, the book, the simple room. "I'm supposed to love everyone like a shepherd." "Find me the rule that says you can't marry," she whispered, lifting half a smile through wet lashes. "What kind of preacher are you, Reverend Alden, if you don't know your own rules?" He laughed then, soft and broken and good, lifted her hand to his lips and pressed it there quickly, reverently, like a man in a parched land drinking. A fingertip of water. A knock came hard at the front door. They sprang apart. Not because they were ashamed of feeling, but because the world outside had come calling again with its papers and its men. "Reverend," Ezra's voice called. "They're lighting torches in the square. Silas wants a parley at sunrise." Liza's fingers squeezed Jonah's once more and let go. "We are only beginning this talk," she said. "I know," he said. He watched her go back into the shadow, and then he sat down and finished the letter that would not change the past, but might heal the present. It began, "Beloved flock." It ended, "Set your stones down. I will tell you who I am." Vitha's sun came up like a gold, coins slipping out from under a blanket. The town pulled itself into the square as if pulled by a string. Silas Reddick arrived with a judge who looked like a fence post carved into a man, and the scent of money that can buy anything but peace. Jonah stood on the church steps. Mara was on one side, Ezra on the other. The townsfolk spread behind them, some whispers, some lines drawn with their bodies. Reddick was handsome the way a knife is handsome. His eyes took measure. He wore a dark suit and a smile that was all teeth. "Reverend," he said, tipping his hat like respect. "Fine morning." "For a wedding, it is not," Jonah said. Reddick chuckled. "You have something in mind?" "People do not belong to people," Jonah said. "Not here." Reddick opened a leather folio and drew out papers. It's a promise of marriage. Witnessed, he held up another. "Contract for the forgiving of a debt upon the making of a union." Signed by Carter himself, he held up a third. "Judge's presigned license, awaiting the bride's consent." He glanced at the judge, who cleared his throat and nodded as if nodding could bless something rotten. Jonah looked at the papers and let himself feel how the world tilts toward men with documents and men with guns. Then he felt the small hand he had held last night and the strength in it. He lifted his chin. "She asked for sanctuary. Sanctuary is for saints," Reddick said. "Eliza Carter lived in my house for weeks to learn manner and table. She accepted my gifts. She knew what she was about." Eliza's voice came from the street. "I knew I wanted to live," she said, walking into the square like a woman who had made up her mind. The crowd shifted, a murmur rising. "I knew what it felt like to be measured like cloth on a bolt." Reddick's smile stiffened. "Eliza," he said, "pleasant as poison. You are very young. You are very foolish. Come down now and let's fix what's been broken." "How many fences did you fix with that money my father owes?" she asked. "How many men did you pay to saddle their horses and ride if a girl cried? How much of your heart would you say is yours, Silas? And how much belongs to the part of you that wants to own everything you can see?" Reddick's jaw shifted. The judge cleared his throat again and looked like he wanted to dissolve into his coat. Boone Fitch stepped forward then, hands open, as if to ease things. He looked at Jonah long and steady, and Jonah felt the clock ticking inside that gaze. "I do not want blood here," Fitch said. "Let's take the words inside. The church, perhaps, what needs saying, decide what needs deciding. Let the town go on with its day." Jonah looked at Mara. She raised one eyebrow. He looked at Ezra. The boy nodded like a man. "Fine," Jonah said. "Inside, then? No guns." "Now that," Fitch said, as if impressed, "is a rule I can respect." They went inside, Reddick with his papers, the judge with his gavel hand, Fitch with his men hovering, hands to near belts. Eliza walked beside Mara, and Mara's elbow brushed hers in a quiet promise. Jonah stood at the pulpit, his letter resting there like a coiled thing. He put his hands on either side of it, feeling the splintered wood under his palms. "I have something to say first," he said. Later, Reddick said, "We'll have the legal part, and then now," Jonah said. He looked out at his town. He saw Ruthie, the schoolteacher, her hair pulled back too tight because she liked the feeling of control. He saw Mr. Chen, who had come from far away and had stitched Jonah's hand without asking why it had been cut. He saw Samuel Ward, who had once slept on the church steps for 3 nights because he had nowhere else to go. He saw people whose troubles he knew and people whose troubles he only guesses at, but felt in the way they stood. "I have lied to you," he said. A ripple in the pews. Reddick smiled like a cat watching a bird hop closer. "I took a new name and let you think the past was clean. It was not. I fought in the war. I did not fight well, for cause or for myself. After, I rode with men who took what they wanted from lonely places." Boone Fitch knows this because he was there. Fitch's face did not move, but something like a shadow crossed it, and then it was gone. "I left that life. I came here to wash dishes and listen to grief and pick up the pieces where I could. I am not asking you to forget what I was. I am asking you to look at what I am trying to be." "Who are you?" someone called. It was Samuel Ward. He did not say it mean. Said it like a man who wanted to know which way to bend his heart. "Nathaniel James," Jonah said, in a voice that did not waver now. "The boy who left this county with mud on his boots and came back with blood he could not wash off. If you want me to leave this pulpit, I will. I will sweep your steps and shoe your horses and take your insults and your forgiveness as you give them." Silas Reddick clapped slowly, the sound smacking the room. "What a performance," he said. What sincerity, yet what does it have to do with the matter at hand? We are not weighing your soul, Reverend. We are retrieving my bride. Eliza stood up, plain as the morning, brave as a horse that will not bolt. I am not your anything, she said. Reddick's eyes flashed. Sharp. Then the law will settle it. He nodded to the judge, who shifted in his seat and cleared his throat and began to read in a thin, important voice. It was while the judge droned on that Fitch moved, slight and easy. Even Ezra didn't catch it until it was too late to make. A clean stop. Fitch's men spread like a quiet stain along the aisles. Hands hovered near holsters, then settled on them. Ezra put his hand on his own, sweat slicking his palm. Mara's chin jutted. Enough, Fitch said, loud enough to cut the judge off. We've been polite. Guns came out, the sudden, ugly sound of metal leaving leather. The room sucked in air. Reddick took a step back, more surprised than scared. He did not think anyone but him made moves. Boone, Jonah said. That one name carrying the years between? Reverend Fitch said. We're going to end this quick. Give us the girl, and we leave the men in nice clothes to their papers and their little noises. Give us the girl, and you keep your pretty church free of bullet holes. Ezra raised his gun. He was shaking, but he didn't lower it. You'll have to go through me, he said. And me, Mara said, calm as a Sunday. You point a gun at my boy. You'd better be ready to put it down or use it. And if you use it, you won't like what happens next. Fitch glanced at her and almost smiled. He had always liked a woman with iron in her. Then he turned back to Jonah. Don't be a fool. Jonah stepped down from the pulpit one slow step at a time. Could feel the whole town watching. Could feel Eliza's breath like a hand on his back. He walked until he stood between Fitch and Eliza. You don't want to shoot me, he said. Not because I am preacher. Because you remember the night by the river when I pulled you out and carried you 3 miles with a bullet in your leg. My debt book is full, Fitch said. You stop paying at some point. I don't stop, Jonah said. The trouble and the grace of me. Reddick found his voice again, angry and high. This is insane. Put the guns down. You inside the law or outside it, Fitch? Because if you're outside, you're on my land out there, and I have men you don't want to meet. Fitch looked at him with a long, cool glance that said he wasn't afraid of many men, and certainly not of any that wore new boots bought. For intimidation, and something shifted, small and real, in his eyes. He looked at Jonah. He gestured with his chin. Say it, he said. What? Jonah asked. The thing? The love thing? Fitch said, impatient and a little embarrassed. Get it out. I've seen men die because they didn't say it when they could. Jonah's mouth opened. He looked back at Eliza. She stood very still. It looked like stillness. It was not. It was everything inside her leaping. I love you, he said. Not booming, not preacher voice. Just a man. Eliza, I loved you before. The war? I loved you through it. I loved you while I thought I was too dirty to stand beside you and so stayed away. I love you now in a room full of men with guns. If it ends here for me, I wanted you to know. I am sorry for leaving. I am sorry for the harm my leaving brought you. If I could trade my days for your safety, I would. That is all. Eliza's face folded like paper to let the light through. Tears slid down and didn't soften the steel in her spine. She stepped around Jonah and stood beside him. She lifted her chin and looked at Fitch. I am tired of men deciding about me, she said. The first man I ever gave my heart to had a habit of sacrificing himself before anyone asked. That man is working on it. The other man buys people and spins the law like wool on his own spindle. Mr. Fitch, follow the wind and call it freedom. I will not go with any of you. I will stand here. If you shoot him, you will have to shoot. Me. Ah, there we have it, Reddick said, color high in his cheeks. The outlaw romance? How charming. His hand slid, fast toward his own weapon, a pistol at his belt. He was aiming not at Jonah, but at the floor, as if to scare the room. Men do strange things when their pride is made of glass and someone touches it. Ezra's shot cracked the air before anyone else's. He had been waiting. He had aimed at Reddick's shoulder, not to kill. He hit it, and Reddick's pistol went spinning out of his hand. The judge yelped and ducked. For a second, the room froze. Then everything wanted to break at once. Fitch had his gun up and trained. Mara had an iron skillet from somewhere and looked ready to brain the first man who stepped wrong. Jonah, without thinking, put his body in front of Eliza's. It was a habit so deep it did not check for permission. "Don't," Jonah said to Fitch. Fitch's jaw worked. He stared down the barrel at Jonah's chest. Round them, men breathed fast, the sound of animals in a tight space. Outside, the thin morning sang its thin song. Then Fitch did something no one expected. He smiled, small and tired. "Hell," he said. He lowered the gun. "I ain't shooting a man in church in front of a woman who just said what that woman said." He turned his head. "Boys," he said to his men, "out." They looked at each other, confused, then obeyed. Loyalty is a habit as shallow or as deep as you make it. Boone Fitch had made it deep enough for this. Reddick, clutching his bleeding shoulder, stared, furious and shocked. "You'll pay for this," he hissed at Fitch. "Maybe," Fitch said. He shrugged. "Maybe I was going to anyway." He walked toward the door, and as he passed Jonah, he dropped something without looking. It hit the wooden floor with a tiny clink. Jonah looked down. It was a folded paper. He lifted it and saw that it was a letter in Eliza's hand. His heart kicked. "I took it," Fitch said, as if bored by his own confession. "Last night. From your boarding house steps. I was going to use it to start trouble. Changed my mind." He didn't wait for thanks. He left like he had come, a wind moving on. Reddick swayed. Men who had stood behind him a moment ago stepped away. The town had watched him draw and watched a boy they had known since he'd fallen off a fence. When he was 10, shoot him in the shoulder. That changes a man's shape in a town. "Get out," Mara said to Reddick, voice like a palm on a door. "Go home, so your pride back together in a quiet room. Think about the kind of man you want to be, then maybe come back and run your cattle. Without touching people the way you touch papers." Reddick stared at Jonah and then at Eliza as if he could melt them with his eyes. Could not. He turned, clutching the wound with a hand that shook, and left with the judge tagging behind. Silent as a shadow ashamed of itself. Silence held for a deep breath after they were gone. Then, the strangest thing, Samuel Ward started to clap.
One.
Slow, uncomfortable clap, like a man who knows he might be alone and is willing to be anyway. Mara joined. Then Ruthie. Then Mr. Chen. Then Ezra. The clap became a sound like rain on a tin roof, unexpected and good. Jonah opened the folded paper from Fitch's hand. He recognized Eliza's quick, neat script. He read it, heart in his throat. "Reverend Jonah, if this finds you, it means I found a thing I lost and am braver than I was. I loved a boy named Nathaniel. If there is any part of him in you, tell me in words small enough that I can hold them. If there is not, if you are made new, then teach me how to love a man made new. If it is unsafe for you to love me in the way I am asking, then say so, and I will learn the quiet ways of living. For what it is worth, I am not a thing to be traded. I want sunlight and a small table and a laugh that spills. I want to be someone's choice in the daytime, not just under a sky. I want to be chosen in front of a town." Elisa, he read it twice and put it to his chest like a prayer. Then he looked up into her eyes, which were wet and bright and unshaken. He could not remember before right then what it felt like to have hope that did not hurt. After the men and their papers were gone. There was a long afternoon with bandaging and soup and a dozen small acts that mean more than speeches. Ezra's hand shook when Mr. Chen stitched the cut on his knuckle from where the recoil had bit him. Mara made food until the stove glowed like a coal. Ruthie took children home by 2s and 3s and made them say what they had seen so it did not grow bigger in their heads. Jonah sat on the back step of the church with Eliza's letter in his pocket and felt the wind stroke the back of his neck, and thought about how many times he had felt cold and called it penance. He breathed in. The air tasted like dust and future. Eliza came and sat beside him. They did not speak for a moment. The quiet was not empty. It was the sound of a room after. The last violin note stops, and everyone waits for their own breath to be allowed back in. I have to tell them the rest, Jonah said, not looking at her. What I did, not out of some guttering need to flagellate myself in public, because they deserve to know the man they choose to hold up or not. If they ask me to leave the pulpit, I will. I will stay in town and do what I can. I will not run. More, Eliza nodded. If you have to set down the collar, you set it down with your hands, not because someone knocks it off. He turned to her. I do not want to hide anything from you, he said. It's all tangled up, Eliza. Shame. And pride. Duty. The kind of love that thinks it's holy because it hurts. I thought denying myself meant I was good. I think now it just meant I was afraid. I was afraid too, she said. I stayed in that big house with the long hallway because I liked the way the rugs felt under my feet. I told myself that rich air was safer air. It wasn't. It was just thinner. I could not breathe right there. She took his hand. Very simple, very fierce. I do not know what comes next. But I know I do not want to live where fear decides for me, he smiled. It lit his tired face like a lantern set in a window. Nor I, he said. So let's decide for ourselves, and then be brave enough to live with it. What do you decide, Nathaniel James? Eliza asked. The name fit him and felt like a new coat worn over an old shirt. I decide to stand in front of the town on Sunday and tell them everything. I decide to ask for their forgiveness and accept their anger if that is what they have. I decide to ask you to marry me, not as a preacher to a congregant, not as a boy to his first love, but as a man to a woman who will tell him when he is being a fool. Eliza laughed then, that laugh he had carried like a canteen of water through dry places. I will, she said. Ask me then, like you mean it. He stood. He looked at the sky that had held him like an eye when he thought he was alone. He looked at her. He dropped to one knee, not out of tradition, but because his legs would not hold him in any other position and keep him from shaking. Eliza Carter, he said, I have a past full of rough roads. I will walk with you and give you the best parts of me and fight the worst parts of me every day. I will not leave in the night. I will not lie because it is easier. I will build you a small table and hang a lamp and try to make my laugh spill like yours if it ever dries. Will you? Yes, she said before he finished. It burst out of her like spring after too long a winter. Yes. He stayed on his knee for another breath because he did not trust himself to stand without shaking. Then he rose and they held each other. Not in the way that takes something, but in the way that gives. Mara, watching from the corner with her arms crossed and pride easy in her face, sniffed and pretended not to. Wait till Sunday, she said gruffly. Do it under the sky if you want it to stick. We will, Jonah said. He was still smiling when the first storm cloud in weeks edged the horizon. Mercy's End had gone dry this summer, and men had prayed. Sometimes prayers look like lightning before they look like rain. VII Sunday came, and with it a sky that could not make up its mind. The air smelled like metal and promise. The whole town turned out because the whole town was part of the story now. Jonah stood on the steps of the church again, his letter in his hand and Eliza's hand in his other. He told everything, more than he had planned, because when you start telling truth, it invites its friends. He spoke not as a man trying to keep a job, but as a man trying to live straight. People listened the way people do, when they are not judging, but measuring whether they can live beside you. A few walked away with their shoulders stiff. Most stayed. When he finished, he said, If you want me to leave the pulpit, say it plain. Samuel Ward looked at the ground and then up. You preach good, he said. I never thought a good preacher had to have a clean past. Sometimes I think the good ones don't. Ruthie frowned. You will have to earn trust back, she said, fair as a ledger. You can begin by letting me keep the church accounts until you prove you won't run off with the widow's mite. Jonah inclined his head, humble and relieved. I accept that. Mr. Chen stepped forward with a small bow. The body heals by keeping doing small good things, he said. Try that. Mara crossed her arms. If anyone here wants to find a man without sin to run their church, they can go ride the prairie till the horse drops, she said. Laughter ran through the crowd, broken and grateful. It was not a vote. It was not law. It was something older. A town decided in its bones. Jonah stood a bit straighter, turned to Eliza, and lifted their joined hands. "We have something else," he said, and his voice lost even the preacher's plainness and found the boy's joy. "We ask for your blessing." Mara put 2 fingers in her mouth and whistled. Ezra grinned so wide his face pulled. Ruthie's mouth made a small ooh, then a bigger smile. Samuel clapped, slower but sure. Even the judge, standing at the back with his hat in his hands like a sinner, nodded once, as if he would like to be a better man when he could. "Under the open sky," Eliza said, "Lo, that is what I want." "Then let's do it before the clouds remember to pour," Jonah said. The crowd laughed again. It's easier now. They walked out to the place beyond the last fence where the prairie started in earnest. Identical small humps, rolling out into forever. It was a place where boys got lost, and men found themselves, and women stood and said, "I am here." The horizon wore a dress of storm. They stood together. Jonah said words that were not from a book, but from a life. He promised the things a man can stand behind, and none of the things he cannot. Eliza promised to love him in the morning when he was ordinary and his hair stuck up, and in the night when his ghosts came rattling. She promised not to hold his past against him if he would not let it chain him. They both promised to learn how to be happy, which is harder than being sad after a while. Mara held the rings they had made from the silver of Jonah's old cross and a little gold. Liza's mother had left her. Ruthie cried openly, stood with his hat clutched to his chest like a shield against feeling too much. Mr. Chen smiled as if he had stitched a good wound, saw the skin knit. When Jonah said, "You may kiss the bride," he stepped in, took her face like a man receiving a gift, and kissed her like a man who knows what it is to go without and what it is to return. It was not a kiss to make anyone blush. It was one to make people sigh. It started to rain. People laughed and lifted their faces, hands out, palms up. The rain was soft first and then sure. It hit the dust and kicked up that smell so full of memory, that men in their 50s cried like boys and blamed it on the wind. Jonah and Eliza stood under it and let it wash the last of the smoke out of his hair and the last of the fine house from her. They walked back toward the town hand in hand. Boone Fitch was there at the edge of the field under a black hat, the rain turning his shoulders darker patches. He lifted a hand, a small salute. Jonah lifted his in answer. 2 men who had walked out to the edge and not jumped. Reddick was gone. He had left Mercy's End with his wounded pride and his plans. Maybe he would return with a better heart. Maybe not. Some men understand the lesson the first time. Some do not. Eliza and Jonah stepped over a puddle and into the future.